Hi there, Stephanie Nichols here from Michigan Alliance for Families. Thanks for tuning in to our video series, Getting to Know Agencies Across the State this summer. I'm so excited to have our very own Sherri Boyd with us today from the Arc of Michigan. Welcome, Sherri. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Stephanie. I'm really excited to do this little podcast.
I'm excited about our little new podcast too. I hope it gives lots of people a little bit more information about what's around the state, what things they might want to tap into, or where the resources are. So we're really trying to dive into some of those things that are definitely connected for our families that have students with disabilities, but they may not know that much about. We dive into the ARC. Tell me a little bit about you, Sherri.
So I grew up on a farm in a small community up in the thumb of Michigan. And then I always wanted to be a social worker. So I made my way to MSU where I got my bachelor's degree in social work, worked in the community mental health system for a number of years, and then made a move 7 or 8 years in to get my master's degree in social work at the macro level kind of practice. Systems change, those things at Wayne State University. And at that time, I became a local art director in Livingston County. I doing the individual work in the system, although it could be satisfying at times, I really felt like the system needed to change. And so I kind of switched my focus. I would say that I probably ended up in the field of disability because I grew up with my uncle who has Down syndrome. So I always had a thought about wanting to help folks. We had a really supportive family for him, so his life was good. And I wanted other people to have access to that because a lot of folks at that time, didn't have family support. And so that's kind of how I got
A
here.
lot of us that have loved ones with disabilities are trying to build those positive lives and those good experiences. And then we get to that point where we go, "Oh, okay, so I've impacted this one person and they're on the right trajectory and things are happening. How do I start to impact change?" Do you have any advice for people that are like kind of in that spot where they're moving from that I voice to the we voice and trying to think about systems change?
I think you have to look beyond the individual because one at a time is a slow process. And so for just me professionally, the ARC Michigan provides a bigger voice because our primary purpose beyond the programming that we do is doing public policy change and lobbying at the state level. So I spend a good amount of my time working with our lobbyist who is from McCall Hamilton and trying to get the legislative body to understand the issues of people with disabilities and their families. We try to work with the department to um, work on making policy that's responsive and accessible to people with disabilities. Those are things that, I mean, we've been working on those things for years. Slow change is slow, but I think over time we've had a good impact on things like person-centered planning here in Michigan, self-determination, where folks can have control over their budgets of the dollars that come from Medicaid so they can build the life that they want. So those are the kinds of things that I think you can do at a system level. If you want to individually have impact and maybe it's not through a job, you can join boards and become active in the nonprofit sector around issues that are important to you, that you think will impact change beyond one person at a time. And so those are kinds of the things that's ultimately for me, that's what was important professionally, because it was frustrating to impact a person once and then you had to have the same battle for the next person. It shouldn't be that way. There should be consistency in access and flexibility for people with disabilities and their families when they are accessing supports from the public system. So all that's what we're trying to impact. There are lots of public system issues. There's Social Security, there's of course Medicaid, there's vocational rehab, all of those things the ARC is trying to impact from a system level. I would just make a plug for a couple committees that we have. If you're, interested in learning more about public policy, we have a governmental affairs committee. And we have lots of people on that committee who get updates every month about what's going on. And then we have an education committee that focuses specifically on education issues. And those things are all open to people that would like to participate. And they're all held virtually, so there's easy access. But those things are a way for people to kind of move from the I to the we, because we're trying to impact um, systems by getting people information and making sure they know the latest of what's going on.
So if I was interested in attending one of those, I'm going to find all the details on the website. It's going to say that it meets at this set time
Every
every
third
month.
Thursday or whatever it is.
Perfect.
And then the board, or the, not the board chair, the chair of the committee is listed, so you can reach out to them on an email. Is the website, at least the Arc Michigan one, has a lot of information about how to get involved and what we do.
Excellent.
Our vision is that the Arc Michigan will help people realize and fulfill their dreams of having employment, education, meaningful relationships, and living independently within their community.
I heard you say some of the things that the ARC Michigan is working on. And I know there's a national ARC and then there's also local chapters. Can you explain to me a little bit about the structure of ARCs? If I were to call my local chapter, what am I going to find? And then you told me a little bit about the advocacy the ARC Michigan does and how they're trying to impact change there. I'm looking to find more information on where families might want to connect for specific things. And then things we're advocating on at the state level are different than things that are happening at the national level. How would they dig into that information to figure out those differences?
So from a local chapter level, Michigan has 828 local chapters. And if you, as they say, if you've seen one arc, you've seen one arc. Their focus for all of them or most of them is to provide individual advocacy to people with disabilities. It could be in the school system, it could be in the public mental health system, it could be applying for Medicaid at the local DHHS office. It could be helping people apply for Social Security, and getting into that system so that they qualify for Medicaid at the federal level, so that they can get supports and services from the public system. So ARCs tend to be involved with trying to impact those services locally, but one of their primary focuses is to provide individual advocacy to people. Um, and because of resources in communities, some have more capacity than others. We obviously don't cover the whole state, so if you don't have a local chapter, I would encourage you to reach out to one nearby.
And that's something that I think is really valuable for families to think about as well is look at those chapters around. If there's something you're looking to learn about or want to dig into, knowing those keywords can help when you're looking for them, but getting connected to the network can show you all these other pieces of information and ways to connect that I think is really changing now that we have so much online.
Oh yeah, it's so much more accessible and it's easy to do it. It's, it's not driving an hour. It just is very, people will say, well, it's not the same, but I think it sort of can be just as valuable.
Huge fan of eliminating those like, oh, I don't have transportation, I don't have childcare. How am I going to get there? Like, let me come into your house and teach you all sorts of things and we can move forward from there. And that can continue to happen throughout the lifespan as you're moving through these different stages and need different information.
And then if that doesn't work out for you, I would call the ARC Michigan to see if we can provide some resources for you locally to get some understanding of what goes on in your community. And then the ARC US is again focuses on lots of things, but it's primarily around legislative issues and public policy. Um, they right now are working on obviously direct care wages in the national scene because everyone's in a crisis. Okay,
Maybe some of our people that are tuning in today haven't like they may have little kids. We work
Yes.
with a lot of families. They have a 5-year-old. They haven't thought about direct care workers. Tell me a little bit more about that issue and what's going on.
So for families and people with disabilities, as they get older, there may be a need for them to have maybe support in the family home to provide community, um, access to the community, or they may need any sorts of help, but direct care workers provide that service under what's called community living supports in the Medicaid world. And the wage for those workers is extremely low. In Michigan right now, it's under $16 an hour. And when you can go to McDonald's and make 18, and some would argue that the work is less stressful. I don't know about that. But the point is that direct care workers can't make a living. And, a lot of the workforce is women. And so they're trying to provide for their family, and I should say single women. And so they're trying to provide for their family and they can't make ends meet on $15.72 an hour. So this nationally is an issue. And so there's just lots of public policy and legislative work to try to get the system to, if you will, mandate, a wage that is livable. In Michigan, we're saying you got to pay $20 an hour. There should be healthcare. There should be benefits. It should be a more attractive job, because it's really important. Because if we don't have direct care workers, the system can fall apart, because it's the most vital support to keep people stable. And you can see across Michigan, people, there's cases or people who are sitting in emergency rooms and their families can't support them anymore, but there's no place for them to go because they can't get direct care workers. So it's just one of those things that I think the ARC's been working on for 15 years. I think it's especially gotten worse since COVID, because there's the job market is, you can just make better wages in other industries. People don't have the luxury of just doing it because it's important and it makes them feel good. They have to be able to support their family and themselves. When I was a direct care worker back in college, and it was a good job, and it was satisfying, and it paid my, for my food and other things I need to be able to buy. And it's, people just can't do that now. And so, and the other thing is I was a college kid, so I was gonna move on. So, that workforce is likely to move on. So you have to stabilize it by getting people that are gonna stay with a decent wage and opportunities to increase your wage, get more training, and do other things. So I don't know what the answer is. There's the attitude is always, there's all this money in the system, make it work. But unfortunately, it doesn't get down to the most important and basic support that people need.
Where this is like day-to-day life for people to make things function and have the supports that they need. So to be able to
Absolutely.
have people in those positions is so essential.
That's why we spend a lot of time. We have a statewide group called the Direct Care Wage Coalition of statewide advocacy organizations. And, we put time and resource into trying to have an impact on that very important thing, because we see it as the most important thing. So,
Thank you for explaining that issue a little bit more for our viewers so we have a better understanding of what that looks like and why that advocacy is so important. All right. So I heard you say that if I have a issue right now for me, for my child, for my family, my best bet is to, if I have a local ARC, contact my local ARC. They're going to be able to provide me that individual support. If I am looking for more things that are going on at the state level as far as impacting change, I want to connect with the ARC Michigan. If I'm looking for national impact, I want to connect with the ARC US.
so we are all affiliated with each other. It does not mean that we get to tell each other what to do. What it does mean is we agree to some core values and we agree to use those in our work and what we do at the state level and at the local level. So we're part of a much bigger entity, which is good in terms of public policy advocacy and having an impact. The ARC US has a pretty strong reputation, as does the ARC Michigan, and it allows us to support the chapters from that standpoint so that they can do more of the individual work that has to be done, obviously, because systems change is slow. Sometimes I have members call from locals and want me to make a ARC chapter do something, and we just, don't. We're all affiliated, and as long as you are following the core values of the ARC US and the ARC Michigan, that's how we band together to have more impact.
If I wanted to dig into those core values a little bit more, or like what the stances are or positions are, where would I find those?
So the ARC Michigan on our website has many position statements. Um, our vision, purpose, mission, all focuses on people having a life that you and I would all want. Being a part of their community, having a job, doing the things that everyone does, and not necessarily being restricted in any way, but having a life with supports. Obviously, lifelong support for folks is expensive, but that's what the public mental health or public system is supposed to do, is to help them have a life like ours. And then they can, have their income and have a job where they can pay their bills, if you will. So all that to say is we're trying to promote that people with disabilities just want the same kind of life that you and I have.
Heard you say person-centered planning when you were talking about some of the focus areas. And I think that we all kind of heard that one, okay, yeah, we all plan lives around ourselves. And that really is what person-centered planning is about. It's about someone else not pushing an agenda on you of saying like, here's how much you need to exercise every day, and this is now your goal because I decided. This is really about individuals making their priorities and planning around themselves so their team is really supporting what they're after.
Absolutely. When I was in my career, I was a case manager, and I can't tell you how many diet goals and things that really were medically focused. People did not care about that. So the system, to its credit, has really moved forward and tried to provide person-centered planning as a model of support. So it's not about changing the person or making them this, that, or the other thing. It's about supporting them where they're at. And if they do want to exercise more or lose some weight because of a health condition, that can be also done. But it's not about the dietitian or the clinician saying you must have 1,500 calories a day and you must walk every day. But it really was that way back 35 years ago. So that part has changed. We still don't have direct care workers, but the intent of the system has really moved and gotten away from the medical model to more about person-centered planning and what do I want to have a good life.
The other advocacy priorities with the ARC Michigan is supported decision making. And that, again, that life we all want, that, like, yep, I'm going to try and choose the best car for me to get around, what my mode of transportation is going to be, but I don't know that much about cars. I'm going to research, I'm going to tap into people that have other knowledge. I'm going to rely on my dentist to give me advice about my teeth. That none of us are truly independent. We're all interdependent. We all have this supported decision making in our lives. And that's not that someone else decides for us, but that we can lean into those circles of supports and those people.
Michigan has a really high number of guardianships. Like, I don't know, even it's like one of the highest in the US. And what happens is the system just automatically, when your kiddo, for example, in school is going to be becoming 18, the school will just tell the parents become the guardian. They may say things like even you won't be able to be involved if you aren't the guardian. Lots of things that are not really true because you can have tools like the values around supported decision-making where you can guide or help your child make decisions, but you don't have to take away their rights. Having a guardian really takes away people's civil rights. And there are exceptions to having a guardian where you can still do a few things, but really the guardian is making all the decisions. Now, in an ideal world, people say, well, they're talking to the person they're a guardian for, but that isn't like that doesn't happen the majority of the time. It's not always a family member that's a guardian. And there's a lot of public guardians who have caseloads of 500 people. There's no way you can really know 500 people. And so there's a supported decision-making statewide group that is facilitated by the ARC primarily, and the DD Council is really involved. But there's a toolkit out there on the website that helps families understand what supported decision-making is and why it's a better option than guardianship or even partial guardianship. In the Social Security system, you can, if you have trouble managing your money, you can get what's called a representative payee. And that's helpful to people because then it makes sure their bills get paid. And then whatever they have left is theirs to spend. So there are much less restrictive ways to support people than just getting a guardianship. And I think Michigan has had a long practice. Even community mental health systems, recommend guardianship as the first and foremost thing to do.
You said DD Council. I want to make sure everybody knows that that's the Michigan Developmental Disabilities Council. And if you want to know more about them, they will be in a video in a future week on this series. So you can tune back in for that. Tell me a little bit more about ARC. I think, and you can say, nope, Stephanie, that's not true. You're wrong. That some ARC chapters are payees. That is one of the services that is in quite a few ARC chapters where you go, okay, where would I find this service? That your ARC chapter is a really good spot to connect to find others also, but some ARC chapters actually are payees. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Honestly, the Social Security Administration also has a list of your rep payees in your area, but I would always reach out to a local ARC chapter. Obviously, the ARC chapter is probably going to be on the list, but I would check and see if they do it. I mean, it's local. It's a way for people to come get their check, or they have a debit card, and you're not trying to figure out who am I talking to. It's based on a relationship. So, and the other place that may be helpful is, and I think you're interviewing them also this summer, but Disability Rights Michigan knows a lot about rep payee and those kinds of things and what's available. And
I love it when you plug my future videos. It's awesome. I'm so excited we get to talk to everybody this summer and get a little bit more information out there. You talked about that there's not like a supervisory role between the ARC chapters and a little bit that they do different stuff. I mean, they do pretty dramatically different stuff if I look around the state. What are some questions I want to ask my local chapter when I contact them to figure out what they do in their office, or should I just start with websites? What's the best way to figure out what those things look like locally for me?
I think that it's important to check out the website first. One of the issues in smaller communities is that some of them are strictly volunteer based. So they may only be doing maybe some activities for people with disabilities. They have a small board who do a little fundraising and provide activities, because historically that's been a component of local ARC chapters, is trying to give folks things to do that they enjoy. And so you may find that in depending on where you live. So I would definitely start with the website, and then a lot of times they have a link where it's like info at Michigan, Michigan Alliance for Families.org, or it's info at ARC Michigan. And I would encourage folks to send an email to see if they could find out more specifically about what they're doing for folks with disabilities at their local chapter. And of course, then you can always call. But I would definitely do some pre-work because it's just helpful for the conversation when you do call, if you feel like you want to call. I would note one thing. I talked about ARCs doing advocacy. I would say that in in Michigan, at least for educational advocacy, it's important to reach out to Michigan Alliance for Families first, because a lot of times that program of the ARC can help folks get the information that they need. And then if they need an advocate because the situation is really not positive or there's more intervention needed, the Michigan Alliance for Families can refer to the local ARC chapter.
I live somewhere in the state where I don't have a local ARC chapter, and I am a go-getter, which I think I am.
Yes, you are.
How would I explore, like, how do chapters start? Where do you even start to explore if that's something that you're like ready to go, you have the time, you have the energy, you're ready to focus in and help people in your area? Should you start with like a neighboring chapter to volunteer there and get more information? Are they through the ARC Michigan? Are they through the US ARC? Like, how would that even begin?
So one of the things that the ARC Michigan tries to do is work with local groups to start new chapters. And, for example, before COVID, we were working with a group around Northern Michigan University to try to get one off the ground. It's in terms of incorporating, it's a simple process. The ARC will even pay for the incorporation fee. Um, you need 10 board members and you need to become a nonprofit, and you write bylaws, you apply to become a nonprofit. That part of it is pretty simple. I mean, it's sort of simple. We have attorneys in our network who will actually help people do that at no cost. And then the actual incorporation fee, the ARC has historically helped like pay for that. The issue becomes after is how do you find local resources to do some work? So that is really what holds people up, if you will. The ARC Michigan obviously has work that they contract with their local chapters to do, and so that can be helpful. Recently, the ARC Northern Michigan started, and they were able to get off the ground because they were going to be doing educational advocacy, foster care advocacy through the ARC. And so that gave them a way to get going. And so it's not so much that you can't organize and become a nonprofit and know your mission and do some work. It's how do you get going and have capacity to do things. So you have to, as a board, look at some fundraising, you have to look at grant opportunities and those kinds of things. It becomes an issue of how do we do this work with volunteers, but then how do we move to have more impact through having resources of our own to actually, do advocacy and maybe provide some supports and services around socialization and those kinds of things.
But there's a lot of really creative and thoughtful things that are happening in those local ARC chapters.
And I think people have to be patient because those things take time. I mean, you just have to stay the course and hope over time you'll be able to build a budget and be able to have more impact. Obviously, the ARC in all its forms has a long history of volunteering, especially at local chapters, and that stuff is really, really important, but it's also helpful to have paid staff because it just it gives it more structure and impact.
What else is important that people know about?
So we do a number of programs through other grants besides Michigan Alliance for Families, although that's our biggest impact for statewide and can serve anybody who has kiddos in the special ed system or thinks that they should be getting supports and services through special education. A couple other things that we do is a program through the Social Security Administration called Work Incentives Planning and Assistance, or WIPA. And that helps people understand how their Social Security money will be impacted by having a job. The Social Security system obviously has a really strong interest in getting people jobs. And so that program helps to figure that out for people. So they have a good understanding, because historically, parents, well-intended people will tell people with disabilities not to work because they'll lose their benefits, and that's not exactly true. And so there's that program focuses on that. We also not in the recent past, within the last 5 years, started a special needs trust for that's statewide. And that is it's important for people who maybe have money that they receive from their parents, or maybe they left them a house. It's a way for people to protect those assets
And
so
Sherri,
that,
I'm going to interrupt you and
okay.
say, we're talking to parents that have kids in the school system, and hopefully some of them already know this, but why would they need to protect their money? Why would that be an issue? Why would they need a trust?
So when you get Medicaid, which covers your supports and services through the system, it's expensive. Those services and supports are expensive. And so when you have Medicaid, there's an asset limit. But so you're getting good supports, but then you can only have $2,000 in your bank account. So that's very hard when things come up to handle emergencies or those kinds of things. So sometimes people may have $10,000 they're gonna get from something. And if the ABLE account, which is another resource that is a whole nother topic, if that's not, it doesn't work for the ABLE side of things, where you can put money in your retirement, there's something called a special needs trust. And across Michigan, there's quite a few people that have trusts, but they tend to focus on big trusts. And so the ARC started, we have big trusts, but we have a lot of small trusts. And so if families could not get that service because the trust was too small. A way for you to have more assets so you can have a more better quality of life. And we're not talking about zillions of dollars here, but if you have any money in a special needs trust, you can go on vacation and you can do things you would not be able to do when your asset limit is $2,000.
Appreciate you simplifying it for us today. And as people need more information on that topic, they can dive further in and figure out some of those complications and get those explained. But as far as those broad strokes of why it exists, we thank you so much for simplifying it. I apologize. I interrupted. Okay, so we have the pooled special
Okay.
needs trust.
So then we also have a couple projects that are related to trying to help the system behave better, if you will. And I'm talking specifically about the behavioral health system. We have what's called Partners Advancing Self-Determination, and that particular project works with local CMHs so that they understand self-determination, the budgets about self-determination, and how it's actually supposed to work with a fiscal intermediary who actually gets the money from the system and pays the staff. Again, it sounds really complicated. It sort of is, but it really can help people have control over their life. So that's one project.
So when I talk about self-determination, I talk about being empowered to make your own choices and have your own consequences, and leading, choosing what clothing you're wearing today and what classes you're taking in high school and what kind of job you want. When you're saying self-determination, you're talking about something a little bit more specific. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that means?
Yes, in the behavioral health system, through a waiver that you can receive your Medicaid dollars and have a say about how you use them. So self-determination in that sense is what I'm talking about. You actually have a budget, you have flexibility to move the dollars around, as long as you don't go over the budget. You can spend a little bit more money on transportation, and maybe you have one less hour of support that week, but there's a lot of flexibility and say, if you will, about what you want to spend your money on. So that's really what it is in the mental health system, or the behavioral health system locally, that you folks would get supports from.
Thank you for that clarification.
And we also do site reviews on person-centered planning with the Department of Health and Human Services, where we go to, I'll just say, the system that provides supports to people locally, the behavioral health system, and we look at, are they really doing this well? Did they have a pre-plan? Did they have a person-centered planning process? Did they access what's called an independent facilitator, which is seen, it's a person that knows about the system, but is more open about what's available and knows these things, and so they can facilitate a conversation in the process so that people really understand what's available and how they can make it work for them. We also look at, did they actually get the services that were put in the plan? And those kinds of things. Now, this is only a small piece of the whole site review process, but we feel like it's the most important piece, because what we find is that people maybe had a really good person-centered planning process, but because of the direct care wage shortage, they actually never got those CSL supports through a person because they couldn't find a worker. So that's more of a systemic thing, but it is really, it's an important part of the whole review process of trying to make the system better.
Anything else we haven't talked about yet that you think is important for people to know about ARCs in Michigan, ARC Michigan and their local chapters?
I just think it's a good resource that can provide information outside of the system so that you know how things are how things should work. I think on the system side, there's resource issues, and sometimes it feels like they're just trying to screen you out or give you less of what you need. And so the arcs can kind of talk about those issues and help you navigate to get what you need, and not necessarily in an adversarial way, but in a way that is negotiated and made sense and all of those things. Unfortunately, sometimes we're needed, you know, and that's okay, because we want to help people that can't get access, because those supports and services are really important. What we do is provide leadership. We try to support enhanced local ARC efforts through public policy advocacy. We obviously support governmental advocacy at the local, state, and national level. And what I mean by that is, I may reach out to a local ARC chapter and say, reach out to this representative, or tell me what's going on in your CMH, just so that I have a better picture of what's happening at a local level, so I have a good sense of what's happening at the state level. And then obviously the national level will always reach out about issues. Okay, what's going on in your state around employment? What's going on in your state around person-centered planning? Um, I, this goes without saying, but we coordinate statewide advocacy efforts with other statewide organizations. We try to influence governmental agencies and policymakers in Michigan, and mostly in Michigan. We rely heavily on the ARC-US to do the national stuff, although they will reach out to us and say, please reach out to Debbie Dingle or whatever to talk about another issue like direct care wages. We promote autonomy and self-determination. We promote the value and potential of all people, and we advocate for inclusion for folks with disabilities so that they can participate in their communities like you and I do. We push this a lot. We want high quality services that are accessible and responsive to people's needs. And we also provide training for parents and professionals through our programming, and also on other issues through the governmental affairs committee related to advocacy.
Thank you so much for providing us your time today. I think this information was so helpful for families across the state. We're so glad that you could join us to share this insight into all of our ARCs across the state. I think it really does help it make a little bit more sense and know where they want to connect for that individual, the help that they need, or when they're ready to grow their we voice. So we're so glad you could join us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steffi, for having me. If you have any follow-up questions, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you.